Welcome to 2 Kings. This is chapter 1, beginning here. Now, it does say in here again, it's commonly called the fourth book of Kings. If you remember at the beginning of 1 Kings, we talked about this a little bit, that in the Jewish scriptures, they look at 1st and 2nd Samuel as 1st and 2nd Kings, so then 3rd and 4th Kings. So Samuel, the book of Samuel and the book of Kings is really just a continuation of the same book, basically. So in the King James Version, we call this 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings, whereas in the Hebrew scriptures, it's just 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Kings, basically, is how they say that. So that's why that's that way. So this, just to give you a bit of a perspective of the world, this is around 850 BC. Okay, so we're not quite to the time of Isaiah. Still have close to 100 years before that. This is about 250-ish years before the destruction of Jerusalem, around 600 BC, 585, basically. So we're getting to those types of things. Actually, I think it would be, I gotta think the other direction, 250 years before all that happens. So this is where we're at. So the Great Pyramids have been built, like 4 or 5, let's see, they would have been built almost 2,000 years prior to this. So Egypt has built up their might. Egypt's actually beginning to get to a point where they're not the world power anymore. They're kind of declining. Just for perspective on this as well, they're starting to find more iron, like metal and very elegant sculptures and things that are happening in the world. The Assyrian Empire was founded around 900-ish BC. So it's been, about 40, 50 years. It's getting into the second generation of people in Assyria. So Assyria is growing. They're going to fulfill a whole lot of prophecies here pretty soon that have been foretold. We have, big cultures forming in African continent. The, what was it called? About 1000 BC is the second stream of Bantu expansion. So that's the Great Lakes region of Africa, kind of Central Africa area, growing, doing more there. A lot of things happening. Now, what's interesting is Homer has been around, okay? The great philosopher Homer has been around about this time. So they believe around 890 AD, so about 40 years earlier. So during the time of 1st Kings, we have about the estimated time of when he composed the Iliad and the Odyssey. So that's kind of time frame we're looking at. So the Greek populations are there, haven't quite formed all the way, still just some rough villages and things, but they're getting there. Greek philosophy, Greek culture is forming and emerging. All these things are happening basically at this time. The Phoenicians are around, great sailors through the Mediterranean and stuff at the north end of Africa. Their famous city Carthage is around about 814 BC. That gets formed. It's Tunisia today, but it used to be Carthage. And about 814, that major city gets formed and utilized by the Phoenicians. So just to give you some perspective of where we're at in the history of the world at this point, basically. So that's what else is going on. And like we've learned, there's a whole nother volume of books of Chronicles of the Kings of Judah and books of Chronicles of the Kings of Israel that we don't have access to, that we keep getting, we heard about a lot in 1 Kings. We'll probably hear a little bit more in 2 Kings about it, but there's a lot more to these stories. We're getting bits and pieces. We're diving in and out of the timeline, basically. So some of these chapters have years in between the chapters, basically. So it's just important to realize that it's like walking down there's a big wall in front of us. And as we walk down the wall, we're progressing through the timeline. And all we get are little peepholes every so often that allow us to look in to see what's on the other side of the wall, to see the progression of time over there. So we're not getting the full perspective, just bits and pieces of it. So there is a lot more to the history of the world and biblical history than what we have in the Bible itself. So the Bible is not a complete book. It is a compilation of books, but it's by far not comprehensive or complete, basically, from history and everything else. So, and that's fine, because the point of these is to establish the reign of the kings, to show that, to give them the history of the kings, to show the lineage and heritage. So that's what this is all about, basically. It's not about telling the world's history, but the history of the king of Israel, basically, the king of Judah, because they split. They've got to come back together at some point. So let's get into chapter 1 of 2 Kings. So in here, we're going to learn some really interesting things. Now, verse 1, then Moab rebelled against Israel after the death of Ahab. So again, this is around 850. They estimate around 853 possibly is when Ahab died. But Moab is going to rebel. Moab was one of those groups that Israel didn't like. They fought a lot against each other, basically, even though they're sort of related, distant cousins. And so let's just refresh our memory on this. This is the Old Testament study guide. It says the Moabites occupied the territory east of the Dead Sea. So on the other side, basically. Remember, that is the area where Manasseh, half the tribe of Manasseh, and who was it? I want to say Zebulun. I don't remember now. But they wanted to do there because they did more cattle ranching, and that land was better for cattle versus the promised land. And so they wanted to stay over there. These were descendants of Lot. Okay, go back to Genesis 19:37. So these are the people, if you remember, Lot and his family fled. Lot's wife was turned to a pillar of salt because she turned to look back at the destruction. So Lot was left with him and his 2 daughters. They're hiding in a cave, and his 2 daughters are like, well, he has no sons, so there's no one to progress his line. So let's get our dad drunk. We'll sleep with him. We'll try to raise sons to him as his daughters will raise sons to him. The Moabites are the descendants of that, basically. Years earlier, David had conquered them and their distant relatives, the Ammonites, who were also descendants of Lot, who occupied a territory just north of Moab. So again, that's probably the other daughter of Lot, were the Ammonites. They probably did a lot of following of similar Egyptian philosophies as well, hence Ammon, because Ammon or Amun is a great god of Egypt. Let's see, the Moabites now saw an opportunity to break connection with the Israelites. So with the death of Ahab, they think they got a shot to get out from underneath Israelites, basically. And they were determined to make the most of it. Their king, a man named Mesha, was so proud of the Moabites' rebellion that he wrote about it on a large black stone that has been discovered by archaeologists. More details of the rebellion are found on this stone than are recorded in the Bible. Mesha recorded on the stone the account of hundreds of cities being added to his kingdom and how he built reservoirs, aqueducts, and fortifications. So this, you can look up Mesha stone, or look up Mesha Stela, S-T-E-L-E, Stela. The Mesha Stela is what it's called today, and it is a big stone. It kind of looks like a giant headstone in a way when you look at the images of it. And what it is, basically, it was discovered in 1868, if I remember right, in the Middle East. Scholars were looking for how can we understand and explain the Bible, and since this concept of archaeology had blossomed and had taken off after the discoveries of Pompeii and those other ones, they found that they couldn't read it though. And so they finally, these 2 archaeologists found it. They eventually got someone to read it, figured out what it was. So it's actually one of the longest books from the Iron Age, basically, that they have out there. It is a text from that time period, the Iron Age, and it's one of the oldest they have for that age, basically, and long as far as lots of words and inscriptions and things. The problem was with that still, if you look at it, is as soon as they realized that it actually verified biblical references, France, England, and Germany all wanted it. Basically, they want to go down and get it. And the Arab nations put pressure on the Bedouins who had found it originally to give it up, basically. And so they believed that this thing was in high demand. Maybe it's magical or powerful. So they actually broke the stone into pieces and gave them away as talismans to the different Bedouin tribes and groups. It took a French archaeologist a lot of time and effort and diligence to go find all those and put them together. They were actually able to get a paper mache version of it. So they kind of made up a paper mache paste, stuck it over the tablet. They got an impression of it, and they were able to use that impression to help piece it all back together and form it up again. and put it back together. So quite of a story that they have about this, but it's on Wikipedia. You can go look it up and read what was written on it and everything else. So Mesha Stela is what you look up, and you'll find a lot of information on it. Okay, so Moab wants out from underneath Israel, basically. Verse 2, and Ahaziah fell down through the lattice in his upper chamber that was in Samaria and was sick. So he fell. He was through the lattice in his upper chamber. He was probably on the roof somehow. He got up on the roof. He got up on an awning or something, and he fell through, and he got severely injured, basically. And he sent messengers and said unto them, go inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, where I shall recover of this disease. Now we have to remember Ahaziah was a follower of Baal. We learned that in the last chapter, 1 Kings 22. He followed Baal. He was not a worshiper of God. He was a devout worshiper of Baal. So he says, go inquire of Baal-zebub, basically to the god of Ekron, whether he shall recover. So he's going to go ask this idol, how do I recover? Go talk to the priest of this idol, basically. Now, Baal-zebub might sound familiar to you, and it should, actually. Let's look this up in Bruce R. McConkie's Mormon Doctrine. He talks about this. He said, this name for Satan signifies his position as the prince or chief of the devils. It is the same name, Baal-zebub, as was given to an ancient heathen god, which we're learning about here. In their rebellion against light, the ancient Jews applied the name Beelzebub to Christ, Matthew 10:25, and also said that he cast out devils by the power of Beelzebub, Matthew 12:22-30. So it was an ancient god, but this was a name given to Satan as the king of the devils, basically, or the ruler of the devils. And they accused even Christ of using his power and being a devil like Satan, basically, because he could command devils. So they just thought, oh, who could command devils but other devils? So, that's that fallacy of what seems like 1 + 1 = 2 logic isn't always 1 + 1 = 2. So this is something we have to always be careful with when we're trying to fact check and other things. It might sound right, but it doesn't mean it is right. So we have to be careful. Verse 3, but the angel of the Lord said to Elijah the Tishbite, arise, go up to meet the messengers of the king of Samaria, and say unto them, is it not because there is not a God in Israel that ye go to inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron? So he's going to go. The Lord is telling Elijah. Okay, so remember, Elijah's there. Elisha is his assistant helping him. Elijah's still around. Elijah's going to go meet these guys on the road and say, isn't it true that the only reason you guys are going to this idol to seek answers for the king is because the real God of Israel, the historic God of Israel, isn't in Israel, basically? Verse 4, now therefore, thus saith the Lord, thou shalt not come down from that bed on which thou art gone up, but shalt surely die. And Elijah departed. So that's the whole message. And verse 5, when the messengers turned back unto him, he said unto them, why are ye now turned back? And they said unto him, there came a man up to meet us, and said unto us, go, turn again unto the king that sent you, and say unto him, thus saith the Lord. So they saw Elijah. They didn't get far. They came back. So Ahaziah is like, why are you guys back so quick? I thought it'd take you a little bit longer than that. And they're like, no, we met a guy on the road, and he told us this message to deliver to you. That message is, thus saith the Lord, is it not because there is not a God in Israel that thou sendest to inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron? Therefore thou shalt not come down from that bed on which thou art gone up, but shalt surely die. So he, Ahaziah, said unto them, the servants, what manner of man was he which came up to meet you and told you these words? And they answered him, he was an hairy man, and girt with a girdle of leather about his loins. And he said, it is Elijah the Tishbite. So they're going, we don't know who this guy is, but he was hairy, meaning he had clothes, rough clothes, like animal skin clothes that still had the hair on them. So it wasn't just a smooth leather, sewn together in cool designs or something. It was hairy. In fact, if we look, it's Hebrews chapter 11, verse 37, it tells us in there, in the book of Hebrews, that Elijah wore coats of skins like goat hair, basically. So it's a goat skin with the hair still on it, so it's really rough. If you've ever felt the hair of a goat, it's rough. It's not smooth and soft. It's rough. So he's wearing these hairy skins, basically, around him, and a strip of leather kind of wrapped around his waist to tie it all on and hold it there. And so that was the signature dress or attire for Elijah. So Ahaziah says, oh, that's Elijah, the Tishbite. So he knows who sent this. His dad probably warned him of Elijah too. Verse 9, then the king sent unto him a captain of 50 with his 50. And he went up to him, and behold, he sat on top of a hill. And he spake unto him, thou man of God, the king has said, come down. So the king sends 50 soldiers plus their captain to go get Elijah. Verse 10, and Elijah answered and said to the captain of 50, if I be a man of God, then let fire come down from heaven and consume thee and thy 50. And there came down fire from heaven and consumed him and his 50. That's pretty crazy that would happen. We got some lessons to learn from this, in fact. So let's go through the rest of this story here. Verse 11, and you got to think about this. Why in the world would the king be sending 51 soldiers to go after one man? One, he's afraid of him. Two, it's probably to execute the prophet. Most likely. You don't need 51 soldiers to deliver a message. He was sending 2 people to go to talk to the god Beelzebub in Ekron, basically. So why do we need 51 soldiers, basically, to go after one prophet? In verse 11, again, also he sent unto him another captain of 50 with his 50, and he answered and said unto him, O man of God, thus hath the king said, come down quickly. And Elijah answered and said unto them, if I be a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume thee and thy 50. The fire of God came down from heaven and consumed him and his 50. And he sent again a captain of the third 50 with his 50. The third captain of 50 went up and came and fell on his knees before Elijah. Now this is, you got to admit, okay, the first two groups burned up instantly. The third captain's got to be like, oh man, we are walking into a mess here. This isn't going to be good. So he's got to do something different, basically. So he kneels down before Elijah, and it says here, and besought him, and said unto him, O man of God, I pray thee, let my life and the life of these 50 thy servants be precious in thy sight. Behold, there came fire down from heaven and burnt up the 2 captains of the former 50s with their 50s. Therefore, let my life now be precious in thy sight. So I want to pause right here before we go forward, because I want to talk about some lessons learned in this first, and then we're going to go forward, because this third captain has changed the equation. Instead of coming up just doing what the king wanted, he's coming up going, look, don't shoot the messenger, basically. I and my men don't want to die. The king wants us to deliver this message to you, but please have mercy on us. You know what the message is already. So here's the thing to understand about this, okay? It sounds like, okay, this sounds contrary to the priesthood of God. Because why would, even though Elijah is a prophet, and he's a pretty bold and wild prophet, why would God just go, if Elijah says, hey, I just want these guys dead, why would God allow that? That doesn't make sense. Why would God allow Elijah to use his power to just arbitrarily kill people? That seems like an abuse of the priesthood of God. And that would be if it was an arbitrary thing. This is something we have to watch out for. Now, in, let's see, Clark's Bible commentary, he talks about this. So I wanted to bring this up so we can clarify this. He said, some have blamed the prophet for destroying these men by bringing down fire from heaven upon them. But they do not consider that it was no more possible for Elijah to bring down fire from heaven than for them to do it. So the thing is that to realize is, and there's still more, the quote here I'm going to get into, it wasn't that Elijah just said, God, bring fire down and kill these people, and so God obeyed Elijah, like as if Elijah can command God. That's not what's going on here. Elijah had no more authority to command God than these men did, basically. So he continues and he says, God alone could send the fire. And as he is just and good, he would not have destroyed these men had there not been a sufficient cause to justify the act. It was not to please Elijah or to gratify any vindictive humor in him that God thus acted, but to show his own power and justice. No entreaty of Elijah could have induced God to have performed an act that was wrong in itself. So this is important. I'm going to finish this quote here in just a second. I want to make that known, okay? We understand when we look in the Doctrine and Covenants, when it talks about the priesthood, it tells us, okay, and this is a good warning for priesthood holders, okay, that priesthood is the authority to act in the name of God. But it is only given and utilized when God endorses what you do with it. And if what you do with it does not follow the commandments of God, it is amen to the priesthood. Meaning, even though you have priesthood and you can say things, a bishop or an apostle or prophet or whoever can say things and exercise the priesthood, it does not guarantee that it gets done. Only the things that God endorses that was said. Because if somebody tries to use it in a way that's contrary to the will of God, God says amen. That priesthood doesn't work anymore, basically. That incense is not being honored by God. So the priesthood being bestowed on people doesn't give people the right to control God. God controls all of the priesthood. He's not giving us power. He's giving us authority to act in his name. So long as we act the way he would act. If we try to use it in a way that's contrary to his, it's null and void. God's not honoring that. Now, we have to seek the Spirit to know that. You can't just say, my bishop's gone evil and bad, so his priesthood must be void, and so I'm not going to follow him anymore. No, you have to follow you have to have other leaders higher than that bishop to confirm that. You have to use the Spirit to guide you in those things, okay? Remember that philosophy from the King Saul, it's better to obey than to sacrifice, okay? So you can get in trouble by being rebellious against your leaders, okay? So that's important. I'm not saying you should, judge your bishop or your stake president or whoever and go against them. What I'm saying is the priesthood doesn't give us the ability to command God, okay? God will honor what fits within his rules. If you follow his rules with the priesthood, it works. If you don't, it won't work. Plain and simple. If you have a bishop that doesn't follow good principles like section 121 verses 43 and 44, no power or influence can be or ought to be maintained by virtue of the priesthood alone, but by patience, love, charity, long-suffering, those things. If you're not following that plan, if your bishop isn't following that plan, then you'll see a negative impact in your ward. It's what happens. If the stake president doesn't follow the plan, a negative impact in the stake. So the authority to act in the name of God is inseparably connected to the powers of heaven. And because of that, it's not the authority that commands. It's God that still controls it. So at any moment, anybody who holds priesthood authority, whether it's keys directly or delegated priesthood authority, can lose it at any moment if they do something unrighteous with it. Because God is controlling it. Again, it's not the object that has the power. It's not the person that has the power. It is God that has the power. And if you follow what God says, it works. That's the important point, okay? That way, God controls the power. He keeps it for himself. That way, no one can basically complain or gripe about it. They can't make themselves powerful or make themselves better or more important than anybody else. Very, very important point. So that's the same thing here. Elijah isn't just arbitrarily commanding God, okay? Again, most likely, these men were coming to get Elijah to go back to the king, and basically the king was going to find a fault with him and find an excuse to get him executed. Basically, there's going to be a military tribunal and he's going to be wiped out. So because those are evil deeds, God is showing forth his power, and he's probably telling Elijah what's going to happen and here's what you're going to do, basically. Most likely what it is. So there's more to the story than what we're literally getting in here. But let me finish this. He says here, God led him simply to announce on these occasions what he himself had determined to do. If I be a man of God, i.e., as surely as I am a man of God, fire shall come down from heaven and shall consume thee and thy 50. So it's not Elijah saying that I'm commanding God to kill you. What he's saying is, if I am a man of God, then God is going to show his power by destroying you. because you are the messengers of the king, and basically to send that message back. That's what it is. So this is the literal meaning of the original, and by it we see that Elijah's words were only declarative and not imprecatory. Okay, saying basically, it's not Elijah commanding God, it is Elijah telling them what God is about to do, basically. So just some clarification there. So let's move on with this, because this third captain has come very humbly before Elijah to deal with this. So let's see what happens. Verse 15, and the angel of the Lord said unto Elijah, so Elijah is getting revelation here, go down with him, be not afraid of him. And he arose and went down with him unto the king. So he was to be afraid of the other two. Why? Because the other two were there to kill him. Come with us, and then we're going to execute him, basically. So this guy, the angel of the Lord, the revelation to Elijah is, trust this man. The Spirit is telling him, this guy, this captain you can trust. Go with him. Verse 16, and he said unto him, thus saith the Lord, for as much as thou hast sent messengers to inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, is it not because there is no God in Israel to inquire of his word? Therefore thou shalt not come down off that bed which thou art gone up, but shalt surely die. So this is Elijah. Instead of Elijah telling this to the king's servants to tell the king, Elijah is now telling the king the message, basically. Verse 17, so there's probably again some time here between 16 and 17. So he died according to the word of the Lord which Elijah had spoken. And Jehoram reigned in his stead in the 2nd year of Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, because he had no son. So here's something important. Jehoram is now the king of Israel. Okay. There's also the son of Jehoshaphat is named Jehoram, who's the king of Judah. Okay. So is this the same Jehoram? I do not believe so. I believe this is two different men with the same name, basically. Verse 18, now the rest of the acts of Ahaziah, which he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? Again, there's that book again. So let's jump to chapter 2 to continue to learn more about Israel and their kings.